We're back together again. Welcome in the room. Thank you for joining the virtual meeting space. My name is Whitney Fuller. I am your friendly community engagement manager and a part of the project team for MARTA's Clifton Corridor Transit Initiative. And tonight we are here to provide an update from the last time we were here sharing alternatives about this project. I'm joined with our project manager. Brian, I'm looking for your face, but I don't see it. So if you want to say hello and then advance us into the presentation.
Yes. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. So as Whitney mentioned, I'm Brian Hobbs. I am the project manager for the Clifton Corridor project. And we are excited to have you here today as we give you an update on where we are with this project and what remains going forward for the Clifton Corridor. I'm going to advance the slides here so that we can get into talking about housekeeping, and I'll pass it back to Whitney.
That's perfect. Thank you, Brian. Just a few housekeeping items. I know that we have all been in various virtual spaces for the last couple years, but just in case you forgot, we're here to remind you of a few features that you may or may not be familiar with in Zoom. Again, most of us are here participating live in this meeting via Zoom on our laptop or on our mobile devices. Some of you may be participating via our YouTube live presentation, and we want to let everyone know how to engage with the presentation. So by now you have probably noticed when you came into the meeting room on your phone or your laptop, your line is muted, and you won't be able to unmute it unless you raise your hand and the moderator acknowledges you to speak. And I'll tell you how to do that at the end for question and answer. Your cameras are on. You can choose to have those on or off. For our helpfulness with facilitating question and answers toward the end of the presentation, we have the chat operating in one direction, like traffic on Piedmont. We want you to submit your questions into the comment box. If you look down at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, there are several icons. The chat panel and icon looks just like a little square with the triangle at the bottom. You can directly message Maya Pfizer on the project team. You should see her name in the chat box there and type away your question. Maya will facilitate that question to myself as the host or Brian Hobbs as the host, and we will answer as many questions as possible from the chat and will allow folks to raise their hand and come on audio to ask their question, as many as possible. And remember to raise your hand in the Zoom platform. You can go to the bottom of the screen, look to the right side. There's an emoji icon. You can click on that icon, and inside you'll see a menu of options. One of them should be to raise your hand. Someone from our team will notice you, acknowledge you, and unmute your microphone to join and participate. If you are listening on your phone or your mobile device, you can use the raise your hand feature by selecting *9 to raise your hand. An operator will come on and say, the meeting facilitator has been notified. And once you hear the operator say that you can unmute, you can press *9 to unmute your phone and begin to talk. Again, we'll address as many questions as time allows, and we'll prioritize the chat box and then go to raise your hand. With that said, everyone knows where the bathroom is at because we are virtual. So I don't have any other housekeeping items to share with you. Brian, can you get us started with the agenda and conversation tonight?
Yes, thank you, Whitney. All right, so let's get started here tonight. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of tonight's meeting. Obviously, we came to you before where we had 10 alternatives. And so what we want to do tonight, we want to provide you an update on the alternative analysis process, the Screen 1 process that has brought us here today. And so we're going to present to you the recommended alternatives and evaluation criteria for Screen 2 for those alternatives as we move forward. So again, project overview, alternative analysis, Screen 1 alternatives, evaluation results. We'll talk about the recommendations, and then we'll go to the next steps for this project. Project team, you've seen this before again. These are the individuals you can reach out to. If you do have any questions after this meeting, it encompasses MARTA personnel, our consultant personnel, and communication personnel. And so, which encompasses the project team. So feel free to reach out if you have questions that we don't answer tonight, or that you may think of later. So let's talk about the project overview. And so I'm not going to spend too much time here. As you know, many of you may know a lot about this project. We've been talking about it for a while. We've been studying it for a while. And so I won't go into too much detail, but clearly, as you know, this project is trying to solve a need and a purpose to provide frequent and reliable transit, better transit access and connectivity, and then improve access to the MARTA rail system in one of the most populous corridors from a standpoint of jobs and education in the Southeast. And so this is something that we understand that is needed in this corridor, and we've been studying for a while, and that we're intending to deliver here via this study. So this slide, I just want to talk a little bit about the alternative analysis process, just to give you an idea of where we've been and where we're going and where we are today. And so one thing about this process is we are evaluating the project alternatives at multiple stages. So as you can see, we have 2 stages here, from Screen 1 stage and Screen 2, all the way down to our preferred alternative and MARTA board adoption. And so what we're doing right now is looking to narrow down the 10 to the 3, which we'll talk about today, and then we'll narrow down the 3 to 1 for more MARTA board recommendation and adoption. As you look at the We Are Here, the 3 alternatives that I will show you tonight will go through that Screen 2 evaluation process, and then we'll land on going back and recommending something to the board for locally preferred alternative LPA for MARTA board to adopt. Before I get started in discussing the alternatives, one thing we'd like to do is explain the modes that are being considered for this corridor. And so 2 of the modes, bus rapid transit or BRT and light rail transit LRT, those 2 modes you've heard us talk about a lot here over the last few months. One mode that you haven't heard about on this project is ART, or arterial rapid transit. And the reason we're bringing that up now, as you'll see as we go forward, is that we are considering ART as well for this project now, because we do see some opportunities to utilize an arterial rapid transit route along with this project. And so when you look here at the different modes and the different things associated with these modes, and what's really standing out is the guideway type. Bus rapid transit uses dedicated guideway as well as light rail transit, but arterial rapid transit uses mixed traffic. And so that's a little different from what we've been discussing. And so that's something you'll see here in one of the alternatives. Another point of reference here is that capacity-wise, ART, or arterial rapid transit, gives us about up to 250 riders per hour. When you start talking about bus rapid transit and light rail transit, you start to get above or near the 500 mark or above. And so those are differences that you can see here between the routes. ART runs every 15 minutes or better, whereas bus rapid transit and light rail is intended to be 10 minutes or better. So as you can see, it is still a viable mode that really delivers on speed. And this is not speeding through neighborhoods, but it is delivering on reducing the number of stops and getting people to their destinations a lot faster. One thing I also point out is the planning and construction times for each of these modes, where we're looking at 3 to 5 years for arterial rapid transit, 5 to 7 for bus rapid transit, and then light rail transit at 8 to 10 years. So this just to give you an idea of the different modes that you'll hear about as we go forward and discuss the narrowed down alternatives. So let's get into the Screen 1 alternatives. So when we came to you a few months ago, we came to you with 10 alternatives. 4 of those alternatives were BRT alternatives, bus rapid transit alternatives, where we had multiple options with regards to the terminus station. Each alternative utilized some form of CSX right away. As you know, we've been having conversations with CSX, as we said before. Those conversations have gone well so far, and we continue to hope to have fruitful conversations and come to some agreement here on utilization of right away. So that is something we continue to have. But as you can see, we do have majority of the corridor. We're looking to share some right away. We had options going to the Decatur station, and we also had options going to Avondale. And then the Lindbergh as well. As you look, there were multiple options with regards to how we connect to Lindbergh. You'll see something different there when we move forward and talk about the narrowed down alternatives. We also brought to you 6 light rail alternatives. Again, similar to what we saw in the BRT alternatives. As you can see, Decatur, Avondale Station, we had options each for terminus or east terminus. And then Lindbergh, again, in the west terminus station with multiple options entering it. And again, a majority of that right away, a majority of the corridor, we're looking to utilize some form or utilizing some right way of CSX, and if we can negotiate something with them. And so, again, these are all things that look similar. Again, from BRT to LRT, from the 10 alternatives. And I will point out as well here with the LRT, our current LPA, which is in green, is included or was included in the Clifton Corridor study here from the light rail alternatives. Now we'll talk a little bit about the evaluation and how we narrowed this thing down to 3. So there's methodology, there's stakeholder public feedback, and their results. So we took all of this into consideration to get to the 3 alternatives that you're going to see here in the next few minutes. You've seen this slide before. This slide gives you an idea of the different things we looked at when evaluating the 10 alternatives. Everything from minimizing impacts when you talk about construction, water resources, cultural historical resources. We talk about the project purpose and needs, so things like transit connectivity, travel times, average speed, and then also things such as funding, capital costs and operation and maintenance costs, and then avoiding major obstacles. And then down to the right, public and stakeholder input, equity analysis, as well as the freight rail impacts that may take place. All of these things we considered while narrowing down to the 3 alternatives that you will see here. That stakeholder and public feedback. So we did a lot of canvassing. We actually had an online survey, which is open for 45 days. We received over 1,000 survey responses. In fact, 1,765 survey responses came in. We had comment cards, we had map notes and question and answers for our in-person meetings. We had virtual meetings such as this one, where we had virtual chat, question and answer during those meetings. And we also had a project website, which had a project email where we received emails about the project, and then a comment submission form. So there were multiple ways in which we were soliciting feedback from the public and stakeholders. And we got a lot of feedback, and you'll hear about that here in a few minutes. One thing I do want to do, though, is talk about something that we did have, an issue that we did have. We did have a glitch, a technical issue with regards to receiving some of the comments. And so then this was during that comment period, the 45-day comment period. As I mentioned, we did receive 1,765 comments. And so there were about 8% of comments that we did not receive due to a technical issue. And so what we're asking right now is that if you did not receive an email from MARTA acknowledging that your comment was received, then that you go back and submit that comment again. Because again, out of 1,765 comments, we had about 8% of comments that did not get through. And so we want to capture those. We don't want to leave any comments uncaptured. So if you did leave a comment and did not receive an email from MARTA acknowledging receipt of that comment, please resubmit that comment so that we can record it in our files. So now let's get into the survey results and some of the feedback that we heard from the public. The first thing I want to talk about is general project support. And so one of the questions that we asked from a standpoint of general project support was, would you ride the Clifton Corridor Transit Service? And so if you look at the pie chart, 72% of individuals who responded said yes. We had 18% that said they don't know if they were riding or not. And then we had 10% who actually said no. So if you look at things, 72% is a pretty high percentage of individuals who answered the survey who said that they would utilize some form of transit within the Clifton Corridor area. Another thing that we asked, we wanted to talk about modal preference from an overall standpoint. So we asked the question, are you open to considering BRT alternatives? And if you look at the pie chart, again, 45% did say yes. But we also had 29% that said yes, with the stipulation that we do not preclude rail or prevent rail in the future. And so if you look at it, that's a pretty high percentage, again, of individuals saying that they would utilize a form or a mode of some sort. But we also had 26% just say no. So most respondents are open to BRT to some extent, 74%. And then many respondents support BRT if it does not preclude rail transit in the future. And so that's something we took into consideration when narrowing down these alternatives. We also wanted to learn a little bit more, hear more about our preference on terminus station. We heard a lot, and so each terminus preference was very important. As you know, we were showing both. And so what we heard from which east terminus do you prefer? 29% of respondents said they preferred Avondale, well, 41% said they preferred Decatur. And then we had another 30% said they rather have both. They prefer both stations. It really doesn't matter. And so when you start looking at the east terminus preference, Decatur received the most support, around 41%. But there was strong support for both termini at both Avondale and Decatur stations. But one thing I want to point out here, and one thing you'll see at the bottom, so we decided, how would that look depending upon mode? We want to ask the question, does this depend upon mode where your preference lies for east terminus? And so as you can see in the pie charts here, if it was BRT, 45% said Avondale. They rather the terminus be Avondale, where 41% said Decatur and 14% said some other station as well. Whether it's east terminus station for LRT, we had 50% say they prefer to go to Avondale, then 41% preferred Decatur, and 9% preferred other location. So as you can see, BRT and LRT for Avondale received the most support at 45 and 50%, whereas strong support for Decatur came in at 41% as well. So while I talked about a lot about the comments we receive and the support and concerns, some of the things here, and they're listed here, and we'll kind of go through each of these, which led us to where we are today. We got a lot of feedback, a lot of support for the project in general, a lot of support for Avondale, Decatur, and the terminal both stations, as you saw earlier. So there's support for both stations in regards to where it should go from an east terminus perspective. The mode support, there's high support for both modes, whether it's BRT or light rail. We saw support, even more support with regards to being, if it could be BRT with light rail in the future. We saw support. So both modes received a lot of support. Pedestrian bicycle access, we heard a lot about that. So people really want to see some pedestrian bicycle access along this corridor. Operations inside of CSX right-of-way was very important from the standpoint of affecting homes and people's properties. Many people prefer that we do utilize some form or negotiate with CSX to utilize some form of the right-of-way. Connections to other planned transit projects was very important as well. We heard that a lot. What about the other projects in the area, and how are we planning to connect to those? So those are things we heard from a support standpoint that were very important. But there were also some concerns. We heard a lot of feedback with regards to utilizing dedicated guideway to Decatur. So we heard a lot of pushback with regards to affecting the historic district, the tree canopies, the trees in the area, and the traffic. So those were three main concerns we heard when it came to the Decatur option. A lot of people did not want dedicated right-of-way to go down Claremont Avenue, because with dedicated right-of-way, you do have to what essentially is affect property. And so a lot of people did not like that idea and pushed back on that from stakeholders and public in general. There was a lot of pushback. And then from a standpoint of a historical district, a lot of affecting of the trees, legacy trees, and then the congestion. So major pushback from that standpoint when you talked about Decatur. Property impacts, especially near CSX, was another concern. We do have homeowners who are near the freight rail tracks now who are concerned about any property impacts if we were to utilize CSX right-of-way or some form of CSX right-of-way. BRT travel time impacts. We heard a lot about that. People were concerned outside of dedicated right-of-way. They're concerned about BRT not operating in an efficient manner. So that was another concern. And then BRT capacity, request for ridership information. We heard a lot about, can we support the ridership with a BRT system with regards to how previous ridership numbers were on the Clifton Corridor. So there was some concern about that, and ridership was a concern, and people wanted to know those numbers. So with that, what I do want to do, I'm going to ask Peter Voorhees, who is on the project team, to go through this phase of the process to kind of give you an idea of what we were looking at.
Thank you very much, Brian. And as you hand it over to me, there we are, there I am. As it's handed over to me, maybe I'll pause just for a moment. Project team, do we have any elected officials who have joined us here who would like to acknowledge? Feel free to jump in if that's the case. I'm happy to have you interrupt my part of the presentation. Okay, so what we're talking about is the evaluation now of those 10 alternatives that were presented. Greg, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our MARTA board chair, Rita Scott, has joined the call, and just wanted to give you an opportunity to say a few words if you would like, Chair Scott. And we can unmute you.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I am so excited to see and support this meeting, public meeting. It's always important at MARTA that we hear from the public, that we understand your concerns, your needs, and also what you expect of MARTA. So I am here to listen and to take away from my fellow board members your concerns around the Clifton Corridor and what we can do to make sure we support and continue to support the area with mass transit. So thank you so much for participating, and thanks to the project team. And I expect to hear a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Please continue, sir.
I'll go ahead and continue. Thank you, Greg. Okay, so we're talking about the 10 alternatives that were presented in the spring, and also at public meetings in this summer in July. The 10 alternatives that we've received so much comment on. We had a technical analysis process that absolutely acknowledged all the comments that were received as we evaluated those alternatives over the last couple months. And to start that process, we flagged a few things that were really significant in the evaluation, so much so that if we were receiving a lot of negative comments, or if we were from a technical perspective seeing real challenges with the alternatives, we flagged those as, you know, our nickname for those was a fatal flaw. And I'll present how that was helping us to reduce that set of alternatives. So, you know, that absolutely represented feedback we were receiving, and that key theme that Brian was just bringing to our attention a moment ago on Claremont Avenue, that connection from the North Decatur Claremont area down to the Decatur station, basically that eastern Decatur branch. A lot of resistance to the idea of widening right-of-way in that corridor to provide dedicated transit lanes. And the goal is to provide a dedicated transit facility from Lindbergh Station all the way through to the blue line at the other end, either Decatur or Avondale Station. And in this case, there was so much resistance to providing dedicated right-of-way at ground level on Claremont Avenue to Decatur that it really seemed like the best thing was to screen out those options. And so we'll show how we've done that. And that's impacts to historic districts, impacts to the tree canopy, the beautiful historic trees along the street, just concerns about widening right-of-way there. So every alternative that did that, you see the circle with the cross out on it. Why don't we advance the slide here, Brian? Very good. So other elements that seem justified for screening out in the evaluation. Every one of those alternatives, the 10 alternatives that we showed previously, when those were first developed, the concept was either the project needed to stay outside the CSX freight rail corridor that connects the Lindbergh Station area over to North Decatur Claremont, past Emory and the CDC. Either the idea was, the thought at that time is we needed to stay entirely outside of that corridor and preserve the entire width of that corridor, about 100-foot right-of-way in general, preserve that for freight railroad operations. Or MARTA was exploring the concept of acquiring that entire 100-foot right-of-way, in which point freight rail operations would cease and it would be dedicated for transit and other transportation purposes. The understanding going forward here, and I'll let Brian just speak to this in a little bit, but the understanding going forward is to explore using part of the width of that CSX freight railroad corridor for transit operations and preserving roughly the other half of the width for ongoing freight rail operations. That's the current working understanding. And each one of the alternatives that we're going to show you for analysis going forward works with that assumption that the transit would operate in part of the right of way, whether it's bus rapid transit or light rail transit. So anything that was full CSX acquisition was removed from those alternatives for further consideration. Also, extensive mixed traffic operation. You know, again, we're looking for dedicated transit right of way for the whole length of the corridor. So there was a portion of Piedmont Avenue that had an extensive section of mixed traffic operation. That was removed from consideration for technical reasons. And then also subway alignments, really from a cost effectiveness perspective, were not seen as essential to delivering transit in this corridor. We've got that great CSX alignment that we're looking at, that's roughly 2/3 of the corridor, where you can create that separate right of way, separate from other traffic that operates really reliably and quickly, that eliminates the need for something like a subway along that segment. But any other portions where it seemed like subway was the only way to deliver a project, we were really looking for other options. And we got to the point where we really felt like those subway segments could be eliminated from consideration at this point. So with all that, it really led us to focus on two of the alternatives that were previously presented. What we referred to back then as Bus Rapid Transit 1, and we'll show these to you on the maps. Variations of these alternatives. Bus Rapid Transit 1 was Lindbergh to Avondale with dedicated lanes virtually the whole length. And light rail transit alternative 2 was the same thing, Lindbergh to Avondale with dedicated transitway the entire length. And so it was variations of those that we are recommending advancing. And then we've got a third one that Brian will describe to you in just a moment.
All right, thanks, Peter. As Peter mentioned, I'm going to, I'll speak a little more on the CSX and the collaboration there as we get into the alternatives. But it's going to build alternatives and the recommendations going forward. So we're looking at 3 build alternatives and 1 no build alternative. So as Peter mentioned, fixed guideway options. What we did do is eliminate any fixed guideway options to Decatur. And then the build alternatives do feature fixed guideway service between the Lindbergh and Avondale stations, as Peter also mentioned. And then each operation does assume operation in shared CSX corridor plus a VA shuttle, which you'll see here in a minute. And as I mentioned, the different transit modes under consideration, bus rapid transit, light rail transit, and arterial rapid transit, you will see in the corridors. So the first alternative is alternative 1A, which is what we talked about a little earlier. So BRT with dedicated guideway lanes, Lindbergh Station to Avondale Station. And so if you look here on the map, as you can see, as we mentioned before, a lot of this corridor, or majority of this corridor, is intended to utilize some portion of CSX right away. And as you can see, as I mentioned early on in the presentation, we are no longer dictating where the connections to Lindbergh or Avondale are at this point. These gray boxes, and I'm pointing these out because these are areas we're going to continue to study in the next phase of the process. And so that also includes an option here going to the VA Medical Center, a shuttle option, where we've been working with Emory and other stakeholders in that area to essentially try to provide more transit service to another major employer and hospital in this area. And so again, it's really this area here is still under consideration, as well as areas in Lindbergh and Avondale. And I'll speak a little bit on the CSX piece. The conversations with CSX continue to go forward. They've been great so far in the conversations we've been having with them. And I will reiterate, we have not signed anything with them yet, but however, we are moving forward and evaluating and figuring out how we're going to work together here and if we can make this work. And that is something we haven't really done in the past in this manner. And so that is why we're now looking at utilizing the corridor in this way. The second alternative is alternative 1B. Now, if you look at this alternative, you say it's similar to alternative 1A, and that is correct because it is the exact same alternative. As Peter mentioned, the only difference here is if you take a look here at North Decatur Claremont, we are looking and showing an arterial rapid transit route to the Decatur station. Because we heard so much about, hey, we did not want to expand the right-of-way going to Decatur and going down Claremont Avenue, but we also think that more transit should go to Decatur. This is the best option to give you more efficient transit to Decatur without expanding the right-of-way and also allowing for more ridership along the Clifton Corridor. And so as you can see now, we have a branch line essentially going to Decatur, which will also utilize the dedicated right-of-way going down from North Decatur Claremont to Lindbergh alongside the BRT. And so now you do have much more frequent transit going to Decatur and Avondale both in alternative 1B. Alternative 2 is light rail, and it looks similar to our BRT alternatives. Again, dedicated right-of-way. I'm going the entire way from Lindbergh to Avondale. And again, these areas here, which are in gray, we're still trying to figure out. Again, each of these alternatives do show a connection from the VIA shuttle to the Emory VA Medical Center location. And so again, if you look at these corridors, we are looking at dedicated right-of-way along majority of the corridor and touching Avondale Station. I wanted to spend a little time. We added this slide because a lot of people are not familiar with arterial rapid transit. So this just gives you an idea of what we're thinking about going to Decatur. So with an arterial rapid transit line, you get 15-minute peak frequencies or less. So, there are less stops in our local bus route, there are less stops. So it moves a lot faster through the corridor. It does operate in mixed traffic again. That is so that we don't have to widen the roadway. It does have a unique transit line and vehicle branding. ART routes are uniquely branded. And so that's something you can see as a differentiator from our local buses. And then station amenities. So the station amenities are much more, they're upgraded, essentially from our local bus standpoint. shelters, arrival screens, off-board ticketing, things that you typically would see at some of our rail stations, you will see, and as well as our BRT stations, you can see at an ART station. And then transit signal priority. We like to implement transit signal priority on ART routes. We already do it on we will be doing it on BRT routes, but ART routes as well will use transit signal priority. So that is what we're considering going towards Decatur, the Decatur route. This next slide really talks a little bit about the Federal Transit Administration's evaluation process. That is new starts and small starts grants evaluation process. And the reason we're showing this is because we are looking to go after federal funds for this project. And so we will enter what is called the CIG program, or Capital Investment Grant Program. And all of the criteria you see here to the left on this chart are considered when the federal government when the federal government decides on whether to fund a project or not. As you can see, 50% becomes from a project justification off of these criteria here. And then local financial commitment is another major factor. It's the other 50% of the evaluation criteria here to the left. And so if you think about it, when we continue to go forward, we are looking at this project and looking at the alternatives from an FTA standpoint on what's going to get us the best project at the highest rated project to move forward to receive federal funding. So a few things we did not look at in the previous round or the previous screening process. These are some of the things that we are now be looking at, because that was a high level. We're looking at fatal flaws and things that could potentially keep us from moving forward with regards to those 10 alternatives. So now that we're down to 3, we're going to get a little bit more in depth into what we're looking at. It's everything from mobility improvements, environmental benefits, congestion relief, cost effectiveness, which is important, economic development, which is very important, and land use from a standpoint of getting the ridership. So all of these things will now be taken into consideration a little bit more than they were in the previous screen, because now we've narrowed down to alternatives that don't have these fatal flaws or that do not have some constraint which would prevent us from moving forward. So that brings us to what we're going to be doing here going forward, and with the screen through evaluation and results. We'll come back to you in early 23, from January or February. We'll look to come back to you and provide you with what we will present is the one preferred alternative, which we will then have public comment on. That one preferred alternative, after we have public comment on, we will then look to see if we can get this in front of the MARTA board for recommendation for MARTA board to make an adoption in 2023, spring of 2023. And so this is a very important over the next 2 months as we narrow things down. It'll be very important to hear from you as to which one that you think is the most viable, which one you prefer, and which one will provide the most benefit as we narrow things down to one preferred alternative to recommend to the MARTA board in early 23. We do want to point out that there are several ways to stay engaged on this project. We do ask that you visit the connectclifton.com website, where you can share feedback by submitting questions and comments. You can sign up also to receive email project updates, as we do send out those regularly, and then review all of the project information from previous presentations, videos, and slides, and including the information from today, which will go up as well. So we do encourage you to continue to submit feedback. It is very important as we move forward in this process. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Whitney as we get ready to move into the question and answer session.
Thank you, Brian. I'll get us started with Q&A just by reminding people of some of the housekeeping components. Remember that we are all muted. The audience is muted for our listening quality. However, you can raise your hand by using the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen. If you're participating in Zoom, you can select that reactions icon and look through the menu and select raise hand. One of our team members will unmute you and allow you to ask your question. Before we go into raised hands, though, I have a sneeze coming on. I will go to the pre-submitted questions, or the questions submitted in chat rather. There's a sneeze coming up at any moment, Brian. Don't get startled. The first question is there an agreement with CSX to use their right of way, or is it just conversations with them right now?
Yeah, so that first question, you have to understand when you're negotiating or you're looking to utilize someone else's right of way, there's a process. So a process with the freight railroads, they usually take a while to get to a point where an agreement is signed. And so right now we're in the process of evaluating from an engineering standpoint, the feasibility. They're reviewing things, we're reviewing things. We're having conversations about what things look like, but there is no agreement signed because we will not sign an agreement until we have something that we both can agree on that's beneficial for both organizations. And so, no, at this point, it is not signed an assigned agreement. We are just going through engineering phase, a planning phase with respect to each organization in the right of way.
Understood. We're still at the beginning process. There is an assigned agreement. The next question, Brian, is about bus technology. And the question is, what type of vehicles are being considered? Electric buses for BRT or ART or LRT with an onboard energy storage offering off-wire operation options?
Yeah, so I will say all of the above. And so BRT systems right now at MARTA, we plan to utilize electric buses on all of our BRT systems. And so that's what we're procuring. And so that's the route we're headed. With regards to LRT, we are now considering some off-wire technology for LRT as well. And so it's really all of the above at this point with regards to electrification and the types of propulsions that you can utilize on these corridors.
Got it. I'm looking for someone on the project team might want to help us talk about the planned extension. The question asks, can someone speak to the planned extension of the Green Line to Avondale and or increasing rail frequencies?
So that,
Oh, yeah.
you can go ahead, Greg, because that's a separate project, but go ahead, Greg.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly on this one. As far as extending the Green Line, currently the Green Line, we run 2-car train sets between Bankhead Station and either Edgewood Candler Park Station during the weekdays or King Memorial Station sometimes during the weekends. Currently, that capacity is capped by Bankhead Station, which only accommodates 2 train cars. We are in the process of designing a rehabilitating Bankhead Station. We are approaching 60% design on that project to extend the platform so that it can accommodate full train sets of 8 cars. Once we get to that point, then we will explore what we can do from an operations standpoint as far as increasing Green Line service and increasing the frequency of trains on the green and blue lines. So the current delivery time, I think we're at 2026 on completing that extension for Bankhead Station, and that is something that I think will be a factor by the time we're talking delivery on Clifton Corridor options. So, Brian, if you have anything to add, please do.
No, thanks, Greg. I think that explains it very well.
Thank you both. That's news we can look forward to. Brian and team, I have a question about shared right-of-way. So the question is, why were the full right-of-way options dropped from consideration? And is there a possibility of revisiting full right-of-way once the line is established and ridership demand is incentivized? You okay?
Full right-of-way. I assume they're talking about CSX full acquisition.
Assumption I have. Do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I'll speak from that. And so the reason full acquisition is off the table is because it's really not an option with the freight railroad. CSX is not open to that. Freight operations need to continue in the area, in the region, and they utilize that line. And so they do not want to give that line up because that line is strategic in their strategic plan. So it's not an option anymore.
Thank you, Brian. Just a reminder, I do see hands up in the audience. I'll go through the rest of the submitted questions and we'll get to raised hands. The next question being, what would the VA Veterans Hospital shuttle be? MARTA, micro transit, frequent local bus, private shuttle, or something like that?
Yeah, so our thought process and what we're thinking of doing for the VA shuttle, it would be MARTA public transit. It's not a local bus. What we're considering in our conversations with Emory, we're considering our smaller buses. That could be an option. And so that there'll definitely be CNG if not electric. But again, those buses are intended to be a smaller route, a smaller bus with a route, that a shuttle essentially that goes to the VA Medical Center.
Very good. The next question asks, can you confirm that there truly would be a dedicated bus lane all the way from Avondale to Lindbergh? I'm wondering how that could be done all the way down North Decatur.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second, Whitney. Can you?
Sure. It seems like this participant is concerned about how the dedicated lane would happen on North Decatur.
On North Decatur. Yeah, so what I'll say, I'll let Peter Sanana or Agnes talk about this, but we do have options with regards to a dedicated lane on North Decatur, particularly reversible lanes. And so I don't know if the project team, somebody wants to speak to that, but a reversible lane is what we're considering.
I'm happy to take a stab at that, Brian.
Okay.
So at North Decatur Road, there's about that mile stretch between Claremont Avenue and Scott Boulevard that's pretty narrow, right? And we've heard from the community about pedestrian bicycle safety in that corridor. And we know it's a sensitive corridor. There's a fair amount of traffic and it's narrow. To address the fact that it is a narrow street, one of the options that we're exploring right now, and we still need to do some analysis on it and see how it operates. But the assumption is that there would be, for either bus rapid transit or light rail transit, elevated crossings of both Claremont Avenue and Scott Boulevard that would touch down at some point in North Decatur Road. And when they touch down, that would be a single lane that would be signalized at both ends and is reversible. So if you've got a transit vehicle coming from the east, if it's got a green light, it goes on through and another transit vehicle is waiting. Maybe at some point in the middle, there's a passing track where there can be an overtaking. That's a transit term. The transit vehicles can overtake each other. There's a place where they can pass. Can explore that in the middle. It does need to be designed in a way that allows for sufficient frequency of service to operate. And the concept here is for all of the alternatives, Lindbergh to Avondale, peak frequency would be vehicles traveling in both directions every 10 minutes. And so it has to be able to work for that. But that's something we're going to be analyzing.
And Peter, you might hang on. The next question is about trip times for these three alternatives. Do we have projected times?
We're working on it. That's analysis that is in the process, and we're planning to come back to the community and stakeholders in January with travel time estimates, travel ridership estimates, and some cost estimates also for what it would take to both construct and operate these transit services.
So we'll be back again with more information, more detail. Brian, can you help us travel back through a few slides to the slides with the three alternatives? This question asks about one of those slides. The three different methods was confusing. Why would ART take less time and money if it is solely an addition to BRT? It seems that adding ART to the BRT route between Lindbergh and Avondale wouldn't add too much additional time.
Yeah, so let me explain that. That slide was just a general slide, a generalization of, if from the year's perspective, if a route was built independently. That has no bearing on the project in general with regards to, you can look at BRT. So you're absolutely right. If we build a BRT line, it would still be around the same time for the ART line. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be separate. I'll put it that way. We wouldn't build the ART line first because it is dependent upon the BRT line. So think of that slide as just, those are just general timelines from the standpoint of the types of project and mode and how long it takes to build, but do not associate it with the time frame that it relates to the entire project as Clifton Corridor.
Brian, we have a couple hands up. I'm going to go to the first two that were up, Jerome and then Brian. Jerome, we are unmuting your line and you are live and can speak. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you so much. Thank y'all for hosting this session, and I especially appreciate seeing Chairwoman Rita Scott here this evening. That was really a treat. My question is, or more so a comment and question, we often will compare trains to buses, saying that they are the same. However, for many that use buses and trains daily, they may not subscribe to that theory. My question is really around design. I heard that we will still be maybe using the same bus designs as we currently have. I would like to know, why haven't we strongly considered using updated BRT designs as well as station designs? And what I mean by that is, I understand that Summerhill, that line has or will be using certain designs, but given that this project is a little bit further out, could we maybe explain why we're not heavily considering the highest and best options in terms of design? Because if we are really and truly looking at making the train and bus experience kind of the same or at least comparable, we're really going to have to look at ways in making sure that stations are weathered or enclosed, that buses have a lot of the same amenities that our trains do have, such as chargers and Wi-Fi. So can we maybe explain why we haven't really considered the highest and best designs for this project, this BRT project in particular?
Yeah, so I'll kind of get into it. At this point, we have not gotten into the design phase with regards to the stations or the buses at this point. As you're absolutely right, Summerhill does have some unique designs to the BRT stations. And actually, we are designing the buses now, if I'm not mistaken, and I can follow up on this. I think we will have Wi-Fi on the buses, the new buses, BRT buses. With regard to the look, and the look of the buses, I do myself wish we could utilize a different look. But a lot of the looks you see from the European countries with regards to the way the bus looks, we're not able to, from a Buy America standpoint, purchase that here. So we have to go with what's current in the current state. That's not to say that some of the bus manufacturers will not have new designs going in the next few years that we will or could consider, because we could do that. It's just right now we're restricted to what's out there available to us and that we can get, that does not get us afoul of the law at this point.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Brian. By the way, there is another Brian spelled with an I. We are unmuting your line next, and just introduce yourself when you're with us.
Hi, I'm Mr. Brian. I reside in the Beltline neighborhood. Nice to see you again. And hi, Miss Rita. So you said by January, we should have some more concrete, I wouldn't say concrete suggestions about design, because the reason why I'm saying that is because, you know, the infrastructure law passed it's 2 years now. So the more time we wait, you know, the less time we have to secure those federal infrastructure dollars. So what's the synopsis on that? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brian, and good to see you as well. So we are very keen on getting as much money as we can from this infrastructure law. One thing, January is pretty fast, honestly, from what we're doing right now. We are going to be working through Christmas, as you can see, and to get into January, to have a one alternative that we can take forward. Our MARTA leadership is very aware of the time frame at this point and when this project should be entered into the federal infrastructure pipeline, and so that we can gain some of those federal dollars. And so we're definitely on top of that. And moving to January, moving as fast as we are to narrow this thing down to one, that is pretty quick considering the type of technical analysis we've got to do. So that puts us working through the holiday season to get there.
That's all I want for Christmas, Brian, is to help this project get done faster. I'll go over to the submitted questions via our chat before I come back to raise hands. So this question is about the modes again. The light rail transit option excludes arterial rapid transit to Decatur. Is that because of overall project costs for that option?
No, it does not. So one thing I may have not mentioned it enough times, but the arterial rapid transit route will still utilize the corridor, the dedicated corridor. And so if we have actual railway, it's unlikely for us, we could design this in a way, because we're in a rail bed and we're next to freight rail and freight corridor, it's unlikely that we'll be able to design this and so that the bus can utilize the freight rail or the LRT line as well. It would be more infrastructure if we did do that. It would cost more because there is a certain way you would have to design it. But right now, because there is no design for us in that manner for the bus to utilize the railway right away.
Understood. And excuse me, audience, I'm going off camera and on camera because I'm trying to find slides to help reference our responses. So Brian, maybe you can help me so the audience can follow along with this. Yep. The next question, as the route seems to be finalized, how will it affect the homes along North Decatur, Claremont to Scott? Will the current road be widened or refitted?
Yeah, so some of the things that we're trying to do is mitigate as much impact as possible to homes and the right-of-way impacts in the area, particularly North Decatur, like you mentioned, Scott. One of the things that we mentioned earlier was reversible lane. That is an attempt, again, to reduce one lane, to have one lane and reduce the right-of-way impacts. I can't say right now that we're not going to have any impacts to any homes in the area, only because we're still very early. We're still at a point in the project where we still have multiple alignments. Once we get down to one alignment, we'll get into a very detailed design phase, which will allow us to understand any impacts that may be going forward.
Very good. There's a few other hands that came up, so I'm going to go to our raised hands, starting with Gary, and then is that, I'm going to pronounce your name, I'm afraid, so I hope you'll correct me, but Tias. So Gary will unmute you first. Let us know when you're with us.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. My question is also about funding. Brian, I got the impression from some of the earlier presentations that you'll need the federal funding or some federal funding to go beyond Claremont. Is that the correct way to think about it? And do you have it broken down so you could say, well, we're going to need, X $100 million of federal funding to go to Avondale? Thanks.
So, yeah, no, thank you, Gary. Thank you for that question. Yeah, we don't talk a lot. We haven't talked a lot about the funding at this point. We're very high level in cost, but we will be refining these going forward. But from a funding standpoint, As you know, the More MARTA Atlanta program has dedicated funds to this project. Whether the amount, what that amount is, we're still at this point confirming what that amount is. But that is a local funding match that we do have, but it can only be used in the city of Atlanta. And so that's where you start to hear the discussion around phasing of this project. We were talking about this previously, the previous alternatives about phasing, because if we only have a certain amount of funds for a certain portion of the project, then we can only utilize it in that area. The federal government can still help us there. We can still get in the CIG program because we do have some form of local match. But if we want to get all the way to Avondale, yes, we are still looking to close that funding gap to do that. And so we are having conversations. MARTA leadership is having conversations, as well as the CAB leadership, about what that looks like. Because right now we only have funding, dedicated local funding from the city of Atlanta. And right now that looks like a phased approach. What we are looking at North Decatur, Claremont at the moment, but it could be pulled back even further.
Thank you for that question and response, Brian. I'm going to give this a try again. Tejas, will you unmute and ask your question? We'll try that again.
Thanks, Whitney. And it's Tejas, like the word advantageous. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks to you, Brian, Greg, and the rest of the team. Good to see familiar faces here and in the audience. Yeah, my question is about the potential for transit-oriented development, either led by MARTA or by the city, the county, or any of the other cities. MARTA has done a really good job on advancing transit-oriented development and the necessary zoning changes for that, and a lot of its other bus and BRT projects in recent years. One thing that I would really like to see is not just the idea of development and zoning changes along the corridors, but within the walkshed of the stations. So not just right along the corridor where the bus or light rail will be, but also within, say, 10 to 15-minute walks of where these stations are, so that we can really start getting better mixed-use communities as opposed to, say, condos and retail towers right next to single-family homes. Let's see if we can expand out where the potential development can be so that we can really start changing the shape of our metro region.
Thank you. And to answer, well, to comment on that as well, Jacob Vallow and our TOD team, our real estate team, you're right, they've done a great job of developing TODs around, or transit-oriented developments around our stations. And this project is no different. They're already discussing with the CAB and city leadership about what that could look like. And I will also say that it does take local jurisdictions assistance if we want to expand it outside of the areas that we currently focus on when we're looking at TOD. And it seems that our jurisdictions are open to that. So that is something we can continue to explore. So thank you for bringing that up.
All right, I'm multitasking through tabs. I'm going to go back to the pre-submitted questions in the chat, which asks, what will be done to speed up this process? On top of working over Christmas, I just added that in, just kidding. I think most people understand that bus rapid transit has already been chosen to replace light rail transit. LPA for the locally preferred alternative, no matter what happens with public feedback. This feels like a massive delay. Other cities have been able to implement light rail transit at a much faster pace than Atlanta has, even in the United States. Why can't this be done faster?
Yeah, so there's always a question of why things can't be done faster. And there's a lot of different reasons why. I'll say one thing in our region is funding. You can't really do a lot without funding. And so that, you have a funding source, you can do a lot of studies, but until you have funding sources, it's pretty difficult. So the federal infrastructure bill, check mark. Local funding, we do have some local funding, but is it enough to fund what we want from a standpoint of the entire alignment or even just a phased approach to alignment? So a lot of this, we could speed things up. We could try to speed things up as much as possible, but without the funding, it's very difficult to go to the federal government and say, hey, we need you to participate in this when you don't have the local funding match. So that usually is the linchpin in a lot of these projects outside of actual engineering constraints.
All right, I want to go to a raised hand, and I know we have a few pre-submitted questions that we're still trying to get to about our survey. But let me just look off to the side to see, Elijah, you have your hand raised. We are unmuting you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Whitney. I really appreciate it, y'all. Actually, I feel like my question builds off of Tejas's really well. So I appreciate him opening up the conversation around TOD. I want to make sure that MARTA has alternative income streams for maintenance and for future expansions. So what conversations have been had around the ownership of land surrounding, especially in an LRT scenario, the given stations and potentially leasing of that land, as opposed to turning that land over to private developers, actually MARTA owning that land themselves and having that be a source of revenue through corporate or private lessees?
Yeah, so in recent years, that has actually been something that Jacob Vallow and his team have been focused on. So there are opportunities in which that can occur. And so they are doing an extensive job in that area, not only for these new corridors, but even for corridors or routes that we currently have. So that is on the table, at least what I've been told and what I've seen in meetings is that is something he and his team is really focused on, other revenue streams for MARTA in that way as well.
All right. I'll go to a question from the chat. And there are two that I want to ask together. The first asks, what is the goal and purpose of this project? About 72% of people surveyed said they would use these alternatives. It seems there was community silence until the survey. Please advise.
No, it's go ahead. Was that great?
Brian, do you mind? I think one of our earlier slides kind of gives the overview of the project that speaks a little bit to the purpose and need. I think that might be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you may, I don't know if you're new to the area, but this project really serves a purpose of providing frequent and reliable transit in an area that does not currently have that type of transit access. The Clifton Corridor in general encompasses CDC, Emory, other hospitals, other education institutions, and a lot of neighborhoods. It is a very dense corridor without frequent and reliable transit. And so the purpose of this project is to get that frequent and reliable transit, as well as to connect this area to our heavy rail system. And so that we can move people through the area. Right now, this is one of the largest employment areas in the Southeast. And so to not have frequent and reliable transit in this area is a disservice. And so that is what we're trying to do, is provide that in this area. And that is the purpose of this project. And it's actually, since 2012, we've talked about this and we've heard the same thing. Essentially, people want transit in this area. And so it's been a task to get to the point where we are. Local funding has always been an issue here. But you see, we have some of that, and we do now have some federal government backing. So we want to try to utilize that while it's there. And so that's what we're trying to do with this project.
And the follow-up question about the survey, was there ever a question asked directly addressing the light rail transit versus the bus rapid transit preference? Or was it simply a question of, quote, are you open to bus rapid transit, end quote? Those are very different questions. Is there any indication of overall bus rapid transit versus light rail transit preference?
Yeah, so we did not ask a direct question in the manner in which you're mentioning, and so that is something we'll look to do, and you still can submit questions and comments now. We'll look to do in this next phase of these three alternatives to narrow things down. So it was not a direct question in regards to which mode essentially do you prefer. As you mentioned, it was, are you open to considering BRT alternatives? But that is something we can do in this next phase.
And Brian, you have a robot voice that is visiting from time to time, just to make you aware. But I understand on the slide that and I can't actually see the slide, but can you repeat how that question was asked about the preference?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is it still robotic?
You're clear now.
Okay, thank you. No, we did not answer that question directly, in which the question was asked, did we ask whether you prefer BRT or LRT in outright? It was, are you open to considering BRT? But we can ask that question in this next phase, and you can still provide us feedback for which mode that you prefer going forward.
Understood more clearly. Thank you. I know there's a few hands up. Brian, we know that you had an opportunity to ask a question before, so I'm giving the courtesy of others to raise their hands and ask their questions in the chat before I come back to you. Matt, we'll go to you next to unmute.
Hey, hi, Brian, Greg, Whitney. So my question was about the Cheshire Bridge Road section. I know that maybe it's 2018, 2019 with the RFP, they're talking about maybe doing eminent domain with tearing down some of those properties that were along the corridor. Can you speak about that now, and maybe if those are going to get torn down with the new line, or if those are going to remain in place?
Yeah, so we, and those alternatives that you mentioned from 2018 and before were a little different now. As you may remember, we did not have alternatives within CSX right away. So the property impacts are going to be a little different now. And so that's something we're going to evaluate as we go forward. We're not quite sure just yet because we haven't picked the final alignment or really got into a detailed engineering look. So I can't give you a definite on that, but these are the alignments that we showed today are much different than the alignments we previously shown.
And next we'll go to Hamid to ask your question.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian, for putting this together. I'm sure it was a lot of work. I was also present at the previous sessions, and for what it's worth, I want to say whether it's LRT or BRT, I'm super excited about this project. But again, my question here was, how can we adequately gauge the people of Atlanta's reactions to BRT versus LRT if we don't directly ask that question? Because we've already down selected so much from the 10 options without ever asking BRT versus LRT. And then here we show a slide that says, look, the majority of people are open to BRT. But that is a little bit misleading because that doesn't mean the majority of people prefer BRT. And along those same lines, is there any consideration going to be given to the potential of LRT for converting more people from using cars over to using public transit? And lastly, there was a slide where you showed the preference of the destination as Decatur, Avondale. And I think overall Decatur was the winner, but when you break it down, Avondale seemed to have more percentage of votes, correct? So I was wondering how those two can average in two different ways, because in one of them, Avondale was the top choice, and the other one, Decatur. And like, no matter how you sum it up, it won't add up to 52% or whatever it was. I know that was a lot, so thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'll try to answer each one. If I forget, let me know. I think the first question centered around asking that question. And so, yeah, you're right. Asking that question is something that could really narrow down things. And that's why we do still have a two BRT routes and one LRT route. The LRT routes are pretty similar, and it's really the only viable LRT route that we can move forward. And then the two BRT routes in similar fashion. So again, there's still opportunity here for the public to weigh in on which one they want, because really both routes or all routes go in the same alignment. And the only difference here is that we now have a spur line being the ART going to Decatur. With regards to the second part of the question, and I already forgot. So let me answer the last part first, and then you can remind me of the second part. But with regards to the terminus station here, you're right. A lot of people did say that Decatur was preference, but that was assuming we did not do any right-of-way expansion. So the way we broke the question down, because a lot of people want more transit to Avondale or Decatur, and they say Decatur, they want more transit. But when you start to talk about and get down into the design and the engineering portion, now you start to talk about the impacts. I want more transit to Decatur. However, if that requires dedicated lanes, it requires eliminating homes. And I don't want homes to be eliminated. I don't want more traffic congestion in this area from widening the roadway, more cars. And so that's something that becomes an issue. And it's a fatal flaw, as we saw earlier, because you start having historical resources as well as expansion and takings that you really want to avoid, or people wanted to avoid. With regards to, and I think I remember the other part of the question now, with regards to getting people out of cars. So one, and then I don't think from a standpoint of getting people out of cars, we would hope that more people have an option now of transit once we build this corridor and build this line to get out of their cars. There's not much we can do outside of continuing to promote it and actually make it more efficient for them to use transit than to drive. And that's one of the major aspects and one of the key features we want to do with high capacity transit, make it efficient on time and make it usable for people so that they can get out of their cars and get to the work or get to a hospital appointment or get to a class on time. So that is really the goal here for the high capacity transit modes.
And as a follow-up to that, which this might be, Hamid, your question from the chat, what information do we have on the willingness of car-based commuters to get out of their cars and onto bus rapid transit or light rapid transit?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, there's studies have been done over the years by multiple agencies and organizations. We haven't done one, and essentially with regards to this project in general, but overall, when you start to look at national averages and people who do answer these surveys, they would prefer a more efficient route than to spend money on gas and utilizing vehicles, spending time in traffic. I think I saw a study one time that said people can spend a year up to their life in traffic. And do you really want to waste time doing that when you can take transit, which is much more efficient, and you can get some things done? So we haven't done that on this project in particular, but just in general, you see a willingness for high capacity transit in general for people to utilize outside of cars.
And as a follow-up to those points, Brian, and that question, you might visit our YouTube page. The video recording of this presentation will be uploaded there, but you'll also find other short videos that you can autoplay in the background while you do other things and listen to the experiences of transit riders who have been long-term advocates of rail and other methods, experience BRT. We recently had a peer city tour to Indianapolis, Indiana, where some leaders, elected officials, had the opportunity to experience just that. So it's not quite a peer-reviewed survey or study, but there are different conversations going around. So we hope you check that out on MARTA's YouTube page. The next question, we had a few different questions actually about technology, and then a question about how we're coordinating on pedestrian access. I do want to give a time check though, because there are quite a few questions that were submitted in the chat that I don't think we will get time to address, and we still have some hands up, and I definitely want to get back to Brian and Jerome. I know that you asked questions before, so I hope you will Allow me some grace to go to these questions that haven't been asked already, and we'll try to get to you and close out at the top of the hour. The questions about technology read, has the cost of operation been considered? Electric buses are not cheap and generally have much shorter lifetime than light rail vehicles, and BRT would require more drivers due to longer trip times.
Yeah, so that is something that we do take into consideration with regards to the technology. Yes, if you need more buses, you require more drivers. But the lifespan, yes, right now, light rail vehicles have been in production a lot longer than BRT electric vehicles. And so you do see some discrepancies in the lifespan. However, as we continue to evolve and technology continues to evolve, you will see BRT lifespan last just as long or more than rail. And so these are things that we are taking into consideration. But at the end of the day, we still see right now that both modes are viable modes when you start to talk about moving the most people. And I don't know, Peter or Sanan or someone else on the team has any more insight on the BRT conversation from a lifespan and so forth.
What I can say is that we'll be using industry standard tools to, and this is Peter, we'll be using industry standard tools to estimate operating costs and capital costs. And factored into that is the anticipated life of a vehicle, including an electric bus. Use the best understanding that we've got right now. And that absolutely factors into the cost estimates that we'll be developing over the next few months.
Thanks, Peter.
Very good. I have another question from the chat, and then I'll go to Brian and Jerome. The question from the chat asks, are Atlanta and Decatur working with you on pedestrian and bike connections alongside the corridor?
Yeah, so our conversations right now with the city of Atlanta and Decatur, city of Decatur as well, they are at a high level point. They both are willing to work with us with regards to bicycle and pedestrian access. But again, that's, while MARTA, we really like to include pedestrian bicycle access, we do not build trails. And so we do have to have local jurisdiction participation to do that. So they are working with us on that.
All right, so I'm going to ask Brian to unmute yourself and ask your follow-up question or your second question.
Hi, yes, I had a question because I'm a veteran about the VA stop. How is it a half a mile stop? Is it what's the estimate of that stop? And then the second question, then that's it, I'll be finished, is about circling back to the funding piece. And I know we talked about that at the streetcar meetings, is that can MARTA commit to, reaching out to philanthropic companies and other companies and sponsors to help contribute to the match, instead of just relying on just the More MARTA program and the infrastructure program? Can we commit to that too? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The question around the VA stop, Peter, is that a half mile? I don't know if it's a half mile.
And Brian, can you please pull up one of the alternatives so that people can see the area that we're referring to?
Yeah.
We're doing a quick check here on distance. The route has to be formalized still, but the concept is to connect that Clifton Road station at the main Emory campus, to connect it up to the VA hospital. The distance, if you draw a straight line, it's within a mile, but not really a direct path to get there. What's a little over half a mile? So it's a little over half a mile if you can draw a straight line, but there aren't straight lines to get there, right? So, and we'll explore, can there be interim stops along the way that would serve other markets? But the goal is to connect the Clifton station at Emory campus. You know, a shuttle from that point to the VA hospital.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And to answer your question around commitment from other organizations outside of local jurisdiction funding and federal government funding, we're open to any, you know, at this point, you know, we're open to conversations if other organizations want to participate. I think you start to get into what we call P3, was a private-public partnership when you start looking at that. But we are always open to conversations when the organizations want to commit a significant amount of funding to these projects.
Brian, I'm trying to get just a couple more questions in before we wrap things up. I'll go to Jerome, whose hand is up, to ask his question, and then back to the chat.
Hey, thanks again. I've heard a lot about just really people getting out of their cars and getting onto this new transit option. And in considering that, I think that it's important, again, kind of going back to the design aspect of things. If we're really expecting for people to get out of their cars and onto this transportation thing, it's going to have to be inspiring to them. And design is very inspiring to people. And that's why you'll hear me talk a lot about that. So again, I really would love for MARTA to heavily consider great designs for the buses in addition to the bus shelters. And I'll land the plane here and say that it's really important for our bus experience to start looking and feeling like a train experience, because many people are putting regularly the train experience over the bus experience, and it doesn't have to be that. And there's one aspect that we can really focus on, which is design. We can go on and on about better service, and I think that we can and we will. But one aspect that I really would love for MARTA to harp on strongly is good designs and working with those, I guess, American-based companies, manufacturers to come up with better designs if we don't already have them. So that's kind of my comment, just really MARTA this time, heavily focused on design to inspire ridership.
Thank you, Jerome. That is something, considering when we get into design phase here it will be a little bit, we will have the ability to do that. I think we will have some opportunities just based on what's coming down from the industry to really look at some different things. And so we agree, because we want our bus service to mimic the rail, to give you the same experience of a premium service, our BRT routes. And so that is something we are very keen on, and we'll continue to look into as well.
All right, I'm looking forward to the process to get us closer to the design and all of the different criteria that we have to work through to deliver this project. I have one more question from the chat, and then we'll bring in closing comments. The question is, my neighborhood is at the bottom of the hill on North Decatur Road, heading east from Claremont. How does MARTA expect to have a semi-dedicated lane for bus rapid transit on such a narrow and heavily trafficked road? Why is going on Claremont and then a turn onto Scott, a much wider road, not listed as an option?
Okay. I will ask Peter or Agnes, you guys want to take that?
So may I ask, just to make sure I'm capturing everything, is the idea, should we, to get to Avondale, explore going south on Claremont and then take Scott Boulevard? Is that the question?
They actually said, why is going out on Claremont and then a left turn on a Scott Boulevard?
Right, so a left turn on Scott Boulevard as a way to get to the Avondale station.
Okay, thank you. I was not following the map, correct.
Sure, that's something that could be explored. It would be shared traffic operation on Claremont for a stretch to get to Scott Boulevard. And we're not even seeing at Scott Boulevard the opportunity to widen at the intersection, you know, to have there's a term called queue jump, which is a way to allow the bus to get ahead of traffic, you know, to turn. a bus or a light rail vehicle. It would have to be in shared lane operation on Claremont, and we have not explored the options yet for what it would take to have dedicated transit way on Scott Boulevard either. We know there's a lot of traffic on Scott Boulevard. So it's something that we have not looked at yet.
Thank you.
All right, so I think the summation is we have gone through a lot of work with you all. When I say we, I mean the project team and the audience, and there's still a lot to be done. This might be a good time to reiterate our technical advisory committee that we are convening, and project team, help me be reminded about when that group is scheduled to meet and what the composition and purpose of that group is.
Yeah, so we will be convening a technical advisory committee. Technical advisory committees are made up of stakeholders and individuals who really see or have some form of impact or want to have an input or should have an input with regards to some of the finer details of moving this project forward. So that team will continuously meet. It is made up of the cities, it is made up of jurisdictions, organizations, different private organizations, private citizens. It is made up of individuals who really know the area, as well as government officials, as well as others who can help us, continue to help us move this project forward. So that technical advisory committee, along with public feedback, helps us move forward in the final design of this alignment.
And that group will be convening and working through some of these questions, answers that you all have asked tonight. We did not get to all of the questions tonight, so we hope you will allow us some grace to document and respond to your questions via written transcription that we will work on in the coming weeks and post to our project website. You can see it listed here on the screen. Visit connectclifton.com to follow up and obtain the document of tonight's presentation, along with FAQs from previous meetings, and we'll be posting the responses to your questions in this meeting tonight. Do we have our MARTA chair still with us? If we do, Ms. Rita, we're open to any remarks that you have to close us out.
Thank you so much. I am so excited in regards to all the questions I heard, which also means that the community is involved and you're paying attention. And that is so important to how we service you. Mass transit is a service to the community. And as a DeKalb resident myself, I am extremely interested in how DeKalb feels in regards to accepting mass transit. Your questions around the modes are exciting to me. And please know, no matter what, that we'll make sure that your input is received and that we answer the questions that you're asking. I myself am going to make sure that I receive answers to some of these questions that I've heard tonight. And also to both Brians, hello.
Brians are the rock stars of our team. We have a couple just on our project team directly in the audience. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair, for your remarks. Thank you to all of our other leaders, neighborhood leaders, different organizations and entities that are on the line. And of course, you all, the users and residents and future participants of this video online. We hope you have a great night and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.